Hello, this is Peter Palmieri, and today I want to talk to you about one of the two great novels that I read this year. And specifically, I'm talking about If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino. And I actually happen to read the original version in Italian, but I understand that the English translation is very good as well. Um, if you're wondering what the other great novel that I read this year is, it's Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole, and I plan to make a separate video talking about that book. So, Italo Calvino, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, this happened to be on my list of scary books to read. So, not scary in the sense of a Stephen King novel, but scary in that I was really worried about reading it. And to give you my short list of scary books, War and Peace is on that list. I want to read it, but I'm scared to read it because it's just so long. It's 1,200 pages. Still 3,000 pages shorter than Marcel Proust in Search of Lost Time. But 1,200 pages, that comes with an opportunity cost. I can read several novels in the time that it would take me to read War and Peace. So that's a scary book for me. Another scary book is Ulysses by James Joyce. I want to read it, but I worry that I might not have what it takes to read the novel properly. So, and on that list of scary books was Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. And I found it scary because, well, we all have certain biases and prejudices before we start reading a book, and it affects our enjoyment of the book. And sometimes we can be disappointed just because of our preconceptions. And what I knew about Italo Calvino's book was that number one, it was a form of metafiction. And metafiction, I have a couple of definitions for it. It's fiction in which the author self-consciously alludes to the artificiality or literariness of a work by parodying or departing from novelistic conventions. That's kind of a confusing definition. So I'll give you another definition. A style of prose narrative in which attention is directed to the process of fictive composition, the process of writing. And metafiction is really not a new device. Don Quixote is a form of metafiction. If you read, the beginning of Don Quixote is all about the book itself and the writer and so forth. And another even older example of metafiction is Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. So, I knew it was a form of metafiction, and then the other thing I knew about it was that it was written in the second person. So instead of third person or first person, as we're usually accustomed to reading, Italo Calvino says, you do this, you go in a bookstore, you buy the book, you go home, you sit down. And I thought, boy, that might be okay for a little while, but I think it would get pretty tiring for the entire length of a novel. And in fact, he doesn't keep that up for the whole novel, and I'll explain to you why that is. So, what is this book about? I think this is really a book, if you like to read novels, if you're really interested in how novels work and so forth, this is one of those books that you really should read, even though it's probably different from every other novel that you've ever read. So what is this all about? Well, reading from the jacket, Italo Calvino's own words, and I'm going to try to translate on the spot from Italian, which curiously, he actually has a whole section in the book about people reading and books and how it changes your enjoyment of listening to that prose. And then he also talks about people trying to improvise a translation, so it's kind of interesting. I'm going to actually do that regardless. So Italo Calvino says this book is a novel about the pleasure of reading novels. The protagonist is the reader who 10 times begins to read a book, but because of outside circumstances, is not able to finish the book each time. So how is this set up? This, it's worthwhile sometimes to look at the table of contents or of a book. Certainly if you're reading something that is nonfiction, but in this case, it's really worthwhile to look at how this book is set up. And the index or table of contents is actually, in my version, it's actually at the very end of the book. And what you see is that there's a chapter 1 followed by another chapter called If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. Then the third chapter is called chapter 2. And the fourth chapter is called Outside the Dwelling of Malbork. And then the fourth chapter, or actually the fifth chapter now, is called chapter 3. So the chapters alternate between chapter 1, the title of a novel, chapter 2, the title of another novel, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's how this is set up. And the book begins, it's a very interesting beginning. It actually begins by saying, I'm trying to find the actual beginning here. It begins by telling you what you're experiencing as you buy the book and get ready to read it. So it says, you're about to start reading the new novel, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino. That's the first line of the book. Relax, pull yourself together, keep every other thought away, let the world around you fade away into so that it doesn't distract you. Shut the door so nobody bothers you. The television is always on. You want to tell people not to bother you. So he's actually going through, he starts the book by telling you, the reader, what you're going through as you start reading the book. And after that first chapter, then the actual novel begins. And the novel is If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. But then what happens is, after that first chapter of the novel, which has a nice, great hook, it's a mystery type novel, it has a great hook, it pulls you into the story, the reader discovers that there's been a mistake at the publishing house. And the pages of If on a Winter's Night a Traveler somehow got bound to the pages of another novel by a Polish author. And so the reader now discovers that, the book sort of repeats. It's the chapter by Italo Calvino, then the chapter by the Polish novelist, and it goes back to Italo Calvino, then back to the Polish novelist, and it just keeps repeating. And so the reader goes back to the bookstore where he purchased a book and says, hey, have a problem with this book. And the bookstore owner says, oh, you too? Yeah, we've had a lot of people have come. Yeah, there's a problem with the binding. And but don't worry, we still have a few copies of the Italo Calvino novel, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. So if you'd like, we'll be happy to exchange it. But surprisingly, the reader says, well, I kind of like the Polish writer better than Italo Calvino, so is there any way I can get the book by the Polish writer instead? And the bookshop owner directs him to the shelf where they have that Polish novel. And when the reader gets there, he meets a woman who is also, she went through the same thing. She started the Italo Calvino novel, but now she really wants to read the Polish novel. And so they meet, they have a conversation, they exchange phone numbers. The reader, go home with the Polish novel and reads the chapter. And then again, there's a mistake, which, and this is my bird, there's a mistake which interrupts the novel. Okay, so after you read the first chapter of the Polish novel, you're done. I mean, the reader can't go on. And so this repeats itself over and over again, uh, basically 10 times. There's 10 first chapters of novels. And each novel is written in a different tone, and each novel has its own style, and each novel represents a different genre. And actually, in the Italian version that I have, in the preface, Italo Calvino breaks down how the different novels are, how the pattern of genres in the mind of Italo Calvino. So he has a schematic um, demonstrating the 10 different genres of novels in the way Italo Calvino perceives them. And it's very interesting because we have an understanding, sort of a classification of genres, which we think of it in terms of there's a thriller category, there's a romance category, there's a historical fiction, and so forth. The way Italo Calvino classifies novels by genre is unique, and it really has more to do whether the novel is introspective versus based on external circumstances, whether it's based on perceptions and sensations versus inner life, if it's transparent or dark. And so he has this sort of unique classification of genres, which I had never encountered before. And he goes through it. Basically, this book goes through every genre the way he sees it, the way he classifies it. And there's this very interesting framing device that he uses to go through these different genres of novels. And in every other chapter, he talks about the reading process, not so much the writing process, but a little bit. He touches on writing, but mostly on the reading process and what the reader goes through. And there's a thread running through the whole book, which is this story, kind of a bizarre story that runs through the whole book, featuring a sort of worldwide conspiracy at whose center is a translator who steals books, forges them, falsifies them, translates them, attributes them to different authors, and this worldwide conspiracy is tied to dark political forces, totalitarian regimes, and so forth. So that's kind of an interesting thread that ties the book all together. So why is this such a great book? Well, basically, from the very beginning that you're in the hands of someone who knows what he's talking about. Italo Calvino was a writer and an intellectual, and but he wasn't sort of a presumptuous academic type. And in the book, there's a couple of sections where there's a group of university students and professors discussing one of the novels in sort of very highly academic terms and so forth. And I think he kind of pokes fun at them a little bit. So he's an intellectual, but he doesn't really take himself, you feel like he doesn't take himself too seriously. At the same time, he makes a lot of very, very interesting observations about the writing, or rather really more the reading process, what readers go through when they read a novel. And he talks about the aspects of the novel in a very interesting way. make some observations that sometimes border on the absurd, but still work out. Um, so, if on a winter's night, a traveler, I highly recommend this book for anybody who loves reading novels and is interested in what readers go through the mindset as you read a novel. And now I have to tell you that now that I finished reading this book, I went ahead and purchased Ulysses by James Joyce. So we'll see how that goes. I'm getting up a little bit of courage. I think it was a good idea for me to read this novel before reading Ulysses. So I hope you pick up the book and be interested in hearing any kind of comments that you have about this. It's not a review, it's more of a discussion of the book. All right, well, thank you so much.